Hello everyone, my name is Reese Lindmark and you are listening to The Reese Show. On this show, we're trying to clarify what a good future looks like. I know we're all a bit sad about late-stage capitalism, and we want to transition to something, but we don't really know what's next. So, on the show, we interview experts about what is emerging, this beautiful future vision that we can all lean into. I hope it gives you a sense of purpose and clarity about the future. If you like the show, feel free to do something about it. You can leave us a 5-star review, you can tell your friends, you can name your first child Reese, whatever makes you happy. And if you really dig it, we have an online school called Root, where we help folks understand these root level systems to find our route forward. We have cohorts of world-class systems thinkers that run every couple of months. So if you're interested in that, check us out at root.co. That's ROOTE.co. Thanks. Today I chat with Yele Bademosi. Yele is a crypto and tech founder in Nigeria, and we chat a lot about what's happening in Nigeria today around End SARS, which is this campaign against police brutality there. And it's amazing to just hear from him about all the youth energy and this new collective vision that's happening right now in Nigeria. So check that out, and there's also some links in the podcast notes for ways to help out or learn more or donate. Especially check out the Feminist Coalition. And then we also chat about Yele's current work and how, the rising tech scene in Africa and all of the opportunities and difficulties of that evolution. So enjoy the show with Yele. Goodbye. Also, to make sure there's no confusion here, SARS is not the virus, but is rather a special anti-robbery squad, which is part of Nigeria's police force. And so when we say end SARS, we're talking about kind of like ending police brutality, ending this special kind of, robbery squad in Nigeria, not the virus. Hello, listeners. Today, I'm excited to chat with Yele Bademosi. Yele is the CEO of Bundle Africa, a social payments app, a founding partner of Microtraction, which funds African tech, and he was previously a director at Binance. And in addition, Yele is Nigerian and is currently on the ground in Nigeria as they are protesting police brutality through this hashtag #EndSARS campaign. I'm excited to dive into all these with Yele, and thanks for being on the show and welcome.
Thanks for having me. Look forward to speaking about a number of things.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of juicy topics here. I think to start, let's just start with End SARS. And could you kind of give our listeners who are probably, in, San Francisco or in America somewhere, or could be around the world, but could you give them an overview of like what is happening right now in Nigeria with SARS and what kind of protests are happening?
Sure. So, there's been a lot of conversation initially online, primarily through Twitter, in over the last kind of like month, about SARS. So SARS is a police unit that was initially set up to focus on sort of like robbery. So it's like a special anti-robbery squad.
Mm-hmm.
Over the last kind of 5, 10, whatever number of years, they've begun to move into other crimes, and unfortunately, due to a lack of consequence and I guess balance and checks, the unit has gone rogue. And although the campaign is about it's about SARS, or it's called End SARS, there's actually a broader call around police brutality and police reform. And it's not dissimilar to the Black Lives Matter campaign in the US, but this is happening in Nigeria, and it's been crazy to sort of see the movement move from something that was purely online to offline, in a space of a week, and how far it's come. For most people in this generation, we have not been part of any protests, and so it's created a sense of unity and pride amongst young Nigerians about what Nigeria can be, because the amount of infrastructure and coordination and networks in an extremely decentralized manner that has happened in the last 1 week is truly, truly phenomenal. Like, I've never seen this type of coordination by Nigerians in Nigeria this quickly in my life.
Wow. That's an amazing overview, and I just want to highlight a couple things. One is, yeah, it's interesting. It's funny. I think in America we'll have like the Black Lives Matter protests, but like in Nigeria, where most folks are
Mhm,
black, it's like that doesn't that hashtag doesn't
mhm,
make as much sense, and so it makes sense that you'd have
mhm, mhm,
a different kind of hashtag. And then, as you said, the shift from online to offline into like the real world, and then this power of, and this is something as I've been researching this in preparation for this interview, learning about how
mhm,
the youth and how, tell me more about like what that feeling is like. We're like, wow, so much is happening. These networks are getting engaged. The youth are getting engaged. Tell me more about like what that
mhm.
feels like, or an example of that.
So I think, like, the average young Nigerian is extremely patriotic, and they're just proud. They've always been proud to be Nigerian. But at the same time, you look at what's on the ground, and there's not really a lot to be proud of, right? So outside of media and entertainment and music, the creative arts, when you look at things like governance or other economic index, you just realize that, wow, we have such a long way to go. But at the same time, we still have this pride. For me, the NSARS movement has really shown me what Nigeria can be, because even though we have 36 states, hundreds of languages, people from different economic classes, it's the first time where I've seen people unified around a particular subject, and they're refusing to allow anything distract them, right? And you see kind of like how memes, and when I say memes, I don't mean like the kind of
Yeah.
comedy memes, like ideas or ideology spread. So there have been a bunch of like slangs, words, um things that have kind of like moved through social media, and it's just really, really impressive. One of the most impressive things that I've seen is the Feminist Coalition. They came out of nowhere. Initially, was set up to sort of promote gender equality and sort of issues around gender, and the fact that Nigeria is such a patriarchal society. But they focused their efforts on the NSAS movement at the beginning of last week, and it's just impressive to see that level of coordination, that level of transparency, that level of accountability, that we've not seen anywhere in any form of government, and you hear things like no leaders all the time, because no one wants there to be leaders,
Mm.
right? It's like whenever in the past, when we've had protests in the past, typically there was always very clear leadership, and it was very easy for the government to quell the protest down, because it was like, if they just focused on the leaders, maybe give them some money, or some deal, then they will try and sort of reduce the citizen uprising. But with this particular one, there is no clear leader, and even when there is a leader who does something wrong or makes the wrong step, somebody else is ready to sort of pick up the baton, and it's just been, it's filled me with so much hope about what Nigeria can be and what other African countries can be, to be honest.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, I think that it reminds me of thinking about, yes, you have these new movements that pop up. And when you have a decentralized movement, it is this like, yeah, if you have a leader, a very clear leader at the top of it, then that leader is followable or is like pay offable or
Mhm,
whatever by the existing,
mhm,
nation state system. But within this, it's kind
mhm.
of like this, deeper down, built on the internet kind of thing where it's like, yes, there are some leaders, but there's so much just movement in general. And so that's a powerful thing.
Yeah.
Tell me also a little
And I
ago.
think I think even the I'll say leaders in question mark, like, they refuse to be called leaders. They don't want to be seen as representative for these movements. Like, they're like, no, no leaders, no leaders. And you hear it all the time. So it's like, it's really interesting. It's kind of like what I expect public service to be, wherein that people, if you're in government or you're in public service, you're really doing a service for the greater good of the people, right? And it's not about you saying, "Oh, I'm president," or "I'm the leader of this thing," and you then have egos. So it's really impressive to see that kind of trait being shown, and it's clear that the old guard don't understand it. It's like why is there no leader? You know, and yes, it shows the power of the internet. It shows the power of social media. It shows the power of decentralized networks. Um, and technology, because it's played such a huge role, and even some of the the startup ecosystem that's been built in the last, you know, 4 or 5 years on the continent has played a role in making this, feel very different from previous
Yeah.
ones.
Tell me more. That's actually something. There's this great book by Zeynep Tufekci called Twitter and Tear Gas, and it's about how the Arab Spring was helped by Twitter with this ability to bring people together in a more decentralized, permissionless way, and then it brought the people together, and it wasn't and then the difficult thing though is that there was some fragility to those protests, and that the power of the internet brought people together quickly, but it wasn't able to sustain these long-term kind of capacity building pieces. And so I'm curious, I think the other thing here is that
Mm,
there's maybe a narrative that says, hey, we have a something like the Arab Spring was not created by Twitter or whatever. It's like, oh, it was the people on the ground. And so it's this balance of how much we attribute technology to the protest itself. So I'm just curious from you, I guess, two questions. One, tell me more about how you see technology's role here versus the role of the people. And
mhm,
second, how do you see the kind of does it seem fragile, or does it seem like there's long-term capacity building happening?
hmm. So I think I kind of thought about this a while back. The last kind of main protest in Nigeria was the Occupy Nigeria campaign in 2012, I believe. And Nigeria is a lot different now than in 2012. So in 2012, majority of young people didn't have smartphones because the smartphones were still quite expensive. Android, they didn't really have a lot of cheaper Android phones. The price of data was also even more expensive, so that meant that people weren't really on online as much. And then the social networks like Twitter, especially, or Instagram, you didn't have celebrities or influencers who had multi-million followers. Maybe the most popular people on Twitter or Instagram then will have had 50,000 to 100,000 followers, and there will have been maybe 5 to 10 people with that kind of network. Today, you have millions of smartphones, cheaper internet, or more affordable data costs, data and data plans, and you have people that have hundreds of people that have millions of followers online. This is really unique, and that has definitely played a role in just the spread of information. I think that has made this a lot more successful. In terms of fragility, to be honest, I don't think anyone can call these things are black swan events. It'll be easier to look 6 months down the line and look back at hindsight and say, okay, here are the things that didn't make this work, or how it could have played out differently. So I'm not going to try and play a prediction game. But the way I think about it is there are definitely clear mental models or digital infrastructure or communication networks that have been built and can be reused sometime in the future in a very kind of distributed, decentralized manner. And now that the youth have seen and experienced this, we can never be the same. I was at one of the earlier protests on Saturday when we realized that actually it makes sense for us to stay at a particular location. We needed speakers to keep the morale up. And by the next one on Tuesday, we brought some of these things in, and people are learning, and we see stuff on social media. They'll learn how to protest, and it's like this replicative virus that people are kind of picking up. So you know, even though I can't predict it, I know that the impact of these are going to be
Yeah,
tremendous.
I love that. Actually, I love that answer, because you're like, hey, it's obviously these things are hard to predict. A nonviolent movement is really hard, and yeah, how will it look like other past movements and whatever. But I really like what you said of, hey, there's this sense of energy and revitalization and hope that is existing now, which is so powerful, and that will continue to some extent. and the kind of communication networks that have been built around this will continue to some extent, and the like mental models for how to do protesting and how to do organizing. So like even if quote unquote end SARS like ends, or if there's something something happens to it, those like capacity building did happen to that extent. So that's cool. I think what I would love to learn now too, Yela, is you have this story, and I think this would help our listeners also understand some of the stuff that SARS is doing or was doing. Could you tell us more about this story where you were like personally extorted by SARS?
Sure. So my story is pretty. Um, I don't think is unique. I think that a lot of people have had this type of experiences before. I just happen to, I guess, have more of a platform or voice, and for a number of people, they were surprised that it happened to me. Um, and not that I have like an inflated ego or anything, but it was just, I hadn't shared the story. So sharing my story at the peak of when everyone was kind of telling their stories was like, okay, if it can happen to, a CEO or an investor in the space, then it could happen to almost anyone. And I think for me as well, it was a traumatic experience. For a number of weeks after that, I didn't like passing the road where it happened because it just reminded me of the particular situation. Um, but essentially, you know, it was October 2019. I was on the way home. It was around 10:30. I was just about 2 minutes from my house, and my car wasn't working at the time, so I got a boat. So a boat is like an alternative to Uber in Nigeria. And as we're getting close to the house, we saw like a group of men, flagging down the car with like flashlights. So I wasn't quite sure what they were, whether they were like estate security or policemen. Um, and so when we got there, the driver stopped. They asked him out of the car. He brought out his papers, and essentially, he showed them like what he had, but he wasn't able to. They asked the question. I didn't quite catch what the questions were about. Then they asked me to come out of the car, and I was wondering, okay, what did they want? They asked me like, what's your name? What do you do? Do you have your ID? I had all of these different things. Um, and I thought that was going to be it. Then they asked me for my phone. I brought out my phone. I didn't think twice about it. They started going through my email, my WhatsApp messages, my pictures, and at this point, it began to feel really invasive. And because of the work that I did, you know, I had conversations with like foreigners, other investors about like deals, and they were like, "Oh, you're talking to foreigners. It means you must be a Yahoo boy. Yahoo boy is, someone that does like internet fraud or internet scams." And I was like, "No, like here's enough proof." And they were just not listening. It's like they were hell bent on kind of getting money from me. Um, and it was really really sort of frustrating because I was like, what can I say to get out of the situation? Um, Essentially, they then told me to get into a bus. This bus was unmarked, um, and I didn't want to get in the bus. They threatened me that if I didn't get in the bus, I'll have essentially gotten beaten up. It was around at this time it was around 11 o'clock. It was late. There were no lights. It was just five men, not really wearing any uniforms. Maybe a couple of one had a vest, one had the hat that had the police insignia or the SARS insignia. Um, to That was the only identifying visual information I could get from them. Um, and you know when I got in the bus, they took everything from me. They took my phones, they took my wallet, they took my cards, they took my house keys. And instead asking for 1 million naira. 1 million naira is about 2,000 at the time will have been maybe like around $3,000. No one has to be like very few people have $3,000 in their accounts. Actually, 98% of Nigerian bank accounts have less than 500,000 naira, right? So that gives you a sense of how insane that request was. And I was like, I don't have um you know, I don't have this amount of money. You know, they wouldn't listen to me. You know, they kept threatening me, and then they took me around, you know, a lot of different checkpoints. I don't know how to describe this, but each checkpoint or each drive was about 40 minutes in different directions that were not close to each other. Um, it was only towards about, it was much later when, you know, after numerous interrogations and questions, that they realized that, you know, I wasn't who they thought I was. At this point, like my phone had like numerous missed calls. People didn't know where I was, and you know, they wanted me to transfer money from my U.S. bank account to my Nigerian naira account, and that's not possible. Like even doing USD based transactions in the US without Zelle or Venmo or Cash App is like ridiculously hard. Imagine trying to move USD to a naira; it just doesn't work. You know, in the end, they forced me to go to an ATM machine where I, you know, withdrew all of the money in my account. It was about, you know, I don't really keep a lot of naira on me. I'm very long on Bitcoin and other stable coins. And I gave them about like maybe about $150. And they dropped me off at a petrol station with about 2% battery left. And I just booked my Uber, called my friend that was on the way home when my battery died. You know, if my phone died, I would have been stranded. I wasn't sure I'd have gotten home. It took me about an hour to get back home.
Yeah. Wow. And then, thank you for sharing. I mean, it's so intense to be living your normal life and then to just have something like this come up so randomly, and for you to be put in this situation, as you said, the like trauma afterwards of like seeing, police officers on the side of the road or going near that location again. You're like thinking and replaying those moments through your head. So just again, thank you for sharing, and I'm glad you're safe. Is there was there I guess thinking about that moment where you were like did you know when you were in the heat of the like in their car and they were like searching through your stuff and extorting you from like did you have thoughts of like am I ever going to get out of this?
Yeah, I mean, like I think I was really concerned because I think for me, I was just like anything could happen right now. Anything could happen right now, and no one will ever know, right? Like it was late, there were no cars around. I hadn't made a call. I didn't know where they were taking me, and in that moment, it felt that, you know, I was just going to be like I would like my life was in their hands. Like they could have done anything to me, right? And I just kept thinking and saying, okay, like what do I know? I told them more about myself, you know, give them as much information. I don't know how, you know, stuff that's seen in TV. I didn't know if it worked, but like try to humanize myself and try to identify like the the one kind of officer that seemed to be more open and friendly towards me, because I knew that if I could get one of them on my side, you know, it will be easier to diffuse the information to the rest of them, right? So very quickly, out of those five of them, I identified who the leader was, who the antagonist was, the one who was like, you know, really just was just hell bent on trying to make my life as miserable as possible, and the one who was most supportive. And I focused on the supportive one and the chief commander. Um, but yeah, it was a crazy experience. I think even talking about it and recanting the experience, you know, makes you remember some memories that you've suppressed.
Yeah, yeah yeah I'm just sitting with that for a second and just thinking about. I mean, and I'm, I haven't had similar experiences, but there've been ones where, yeah, I mean, I remember there was just like a time in India where I was there, and then there were a bunch of like taxi drivers that came. It was like it was like 4 a.m, and they all came out of the woodwork and were like surrounding us. And like mine was less intense than yours, but even still, thinking back to that moment and just thinking like, oh boy, could this go bad? So something also that this makes me think of, Yele, is did you like sharing that story could like is that going to get you more in trouble, or like is it everybody sharing their stories and so no one's going to get in trouble? Or tell me like what was the impetus to share, and is that like scary to share?
No, I think For me, when it happened to me, I'd seen other stories, heard other stories, had friends that had their own stories. And at the time, I didn't want to share it because I just didn't want to be another statistic. I didn't have an idea of what the solution could be. And the what made me share was actually another CEO's tweet, which I actually quoted, and it was more like it felt liberating to kind of like share the story just out like so people understand how crazy you know this whole thing has been. And the tweet had like almost one like about 1.5 million impressions, right? So I don't know how many people saw that story. And now you know a lot of people were sharing their story at that particular time, and I think like the number of stories being shared on social media and the videos, and it made me realize how bad this was. And I think that's what made people kind of like get out on the street. So not just my story was, there were thousands of stories, and then you realize that like, wow, like we need change. We need change, and we're gonna figure out how to effect and get that change that we want.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think it's similar in that sense to kind of the hashtag Me Too stuff, where it's like at the beginning, it's like, oh, okay, not
Hmm.
that many. Like, there's just this thing that has actually happened to many people. That then once it starts getting shared, everybody goes, oh yeah, me too. Like this is bad. So one thing
Hmm.
that I'm thinking about here too is like, I guess as this protest goes forward, I know that there's a lot of complicated stuff here where it's like, oh, the government said, oh, maybe they are going to end SARS, but like they've said that many times in the past. They're starting up like a different unit, like a new SWAT unit. Tell me how you see this kind of, unfolding in the next couple weeks or months.
To be honest, like I don't know. This week is very critical. There's a lot of disturbing stuff going on, on social media at the time in terms of bad actors hijacking the protest, or some thugs attacking peaceful protesters, some policemen actually assaulting people, and I think this week is a very critical week. If we can stay the course of this week and we don't relent, we don't give up, and people stay motivated, um, the I believe we can be successful. And I always remind myself like don't get tired, don't get weary, stay focused. And it's tough, right? Like you have like you have two companies bundled, and Microtraction. But at the same time, I care very deeply about Nigeria. I care very deeply about our people, and want it to be better. And I know how critical this moment is, you know, um, in history. So it's I think that my hope is that we keep going. We continue to apply pressure on the government, and some states have been making good progress. Some are much slower than others, and there's definitely been kind of like response from the government. I just hope that it doesn't descend into anarchy. Um, but it's yeah, it's I saw a tweet today. It said in Hong Kong they've been protesting for I think a year and a half, and they only had two deaths. In Nigeria, it's been a week, and we've had more than 10 deaths. Um, and so it shows the difference. That's almost about maybe 75 weeks versus 1 week, and then in 75 weeks you have two deaths, and in 1 week you have over 10. Maybe I don't know what the final number is. So the severity of what's at stake as we protest is a lot higher. The stakes are a lot higher than most other parts of the
Yep.
world. Um, yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm wishing for the best. I think it would be a good time to transition as you chat about your companies here, where it's like not only are you part of these protests and going out there and protesting on the streets, and you have these two companies. So let's chat about those for a second. So there's Bundle Africa, which is this social payments app. Tell me more about like that company and like your goals of that company.
Um, so with Bundle Africa, you know, for me, it starts with wanting to drive the adoption of digital assets in Africa. I personally believe that Bitcoin and decentralized technologies have the potential to lead to the economic freedom and 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 lead to economic freedom and prosperity for the average Africans, right? So, people take for granted the quality and access to financial services that you have depending on your geography. If you're in the US, you can get access to credit at single digit interest rates per annum. If you're in Nigeria, you'll be lucky if you can even get access to credit at all. Most times, if you get credit, it will be double digits on a monthly basis. Um, and this is despite the fact that there's like, double digit inflation as well. So, the money that you hold as to save is literally going away. Um, and so for me, the idea of crypto um, is really solves three things. One is um, you give people give access to financial services regardless, like your geography and where you're born should not determine the quality of financial services that you have, right? Number two is that for Africa to grow, we need serious capital infusion, and that capital has to be transparent. It has to be accountable. It has to be trustworthy so that um, foreign investors or donors really understand where their money is going into, and they know how they can get their money out. And so that means you need a new type of digital infrastructure and financial infrastructure that the current status quo can solve for. Today, Africa's financial landscape is extremely fragmented, um, and that also reduces the speed at which these capital markets can grow and scale. And the final one is that I personally believe that, and this kind of like NSAS movement has demonstrated this, right? You know, we as young people in Africa have a huge distrust for government, and we want to be coordinated but not have any leadership. And the beauty of sort of like blockchains and decentralized networks is this idea of coordination without necessarily a leader or a centralized authority. And even though no one is really doing anything in this front, it's still one of the ideas that I'm actually passionate about. So for me, the goal of blockchain is the goal of Bundle Africa is how do we accelerate Africa's economic development by leveraging this technology that cuts beyond just technology. It's a financial innovation, it's a societal innovation, it's an economic innovation, and I believe that Africa is the best place for us to see the full potential of blockchain and digital assets, including Bitcoin.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. I think that I mean, it's, that perspective of, financial infrastructure in the internet in general, and also for Africa. It's like seeing that, recently that Stripe acquired Paystack for 200 million is just a sign of that. It's just like, there's going to be a lot more growth here of financial infrastructure in
Mhm.
Africa. Do tell me though, like, I'm thinking about, if I want to acquire digital assets in Africa or what have you, or tell me, like, the thing that I thought here was like, why would I use Bundle Africa versus like Coinbase, or why would I use Bundle Africa versus something like M-Pesa?
Yeah, so I mean, Coinbase is sort of based in the US, and that means that for the average African, they can't really access it. You know, to do verifications, you get asked things like your social security number, or you need the US ID, and even then, it is in USD. For an indigenous product like Bundle Africa, it is NGN, and as we scale into other African countries, we'll support the local fiats in there as well. So that's kind of like number one, right? Um, Number two is that there are a bunch of things that we can do and we can enable that are unique for Africa. So for instance, we support kind of like bank transfer and card payments at cost prices that people in the US would only love, right? So it costs like a cent to deposit money, and it happens instantly. When you withdraw, it happens instantly as well. In the US, it takes like some days or it takes like some hours, whatever the case may be. And the other features in the future, such as like savings credits that we're building that we can't do, you can't do on like Coinbase. With M-Pesa is quite different in that number one, it's M-Pesa is primarily in Kenya,
Hmm.
and it's a multi-channel. It's primarily mobile money. Although there's an M-Pesa app for smartphones, it's still primarily mobile money, and it's a based payment network. Bundle does two things. Bundle allows you send both cash and crypto, and also allows you exchange between cash and crypto, right? So if you had if someone sent you Bitcoin, you can take Bitcoin to the M-Pesa network and exchange that for your local fiat, right? So that is kind of like the big difference. Bundle in the future could integrate M-Pesa, although there are a bunch of things around that, but Bundle could integrate M-Pesa. Um, so M-Pesa is just another payment network. Like we add in cards or bank transfer, or mobile money, so that users can cash in, cash out with whatever payment channel
Yeah,
that they want.
got it. Yeah. I think as you said there, the difference between just being a US based company and being, an African or Nigerian based company is big around like the amount, even just thinking about, back to that like Paystack acquisition by Stripe. It's like, Paystack, their shtick was like, hey, we are Stripe for Africa. And so you could be like, oh, well, why are you even, making Stripe for Africa? Like, shouldn't Stripe do, or can't Stripe do that? But in fact, there's so much on the ground knowledge that they have. There's so much, XYZ that then they are making Stripe for Africa so much that, Stripe is like, sweet, I'll acquire you. And so I see a similar thing here with Bundle Africa, where it's like the amount, yeah, all these things that are like built natively for Nigeria and African countries you can do, and kind of be there on the ground. So that makes sense. This makes me think too about, more generally, this kind of the Nigerian and African tech ecosystems here, which are just something that I know very little about. And I think, just for myself and for my listeners, just as a reminder, I mean, the amount of like growth within Africa in the next 100 or 80 or so years is going to be massive. I mean, the world as a whole will go from roughly 8 billion to 11 billion people, and almost all 3 billion of those people will be in Africa. And so there's just going to be this amazing, explosion of youth and opportunity and awesome things getting built in
Mhm.
Africa in the next like 80 years. So I just think it's kind of crazy to even like we're just at the start of that. So tell me, like, what are some of the like what's happening on the ground today with the tech scene in Africa?
Yeah. So I think it's crazy. Um, 2015, early 2015, I was still in the UK, and I was, reading about a company that just raised $1 million. But that was 20. I think that was 2015, early 2015 or late 2014. And it was a big deal. Here is an indigenous founder raising $1 million from an indigenous VC, and that was like a huge milestone. And I was like, wow, like okay, there's something happening in Nigeria. So I decided to move back. And 5 years on, we've had a $200 million exit to Stripe from indigenous founders. And that, in my opinion, kind of like summarizes the growth of the ecosystem. When 5 years ago, it was impressive for a company to be raising $1 million, and then within 5 years, you're getting a $200 million exit, right? It's really crazy to see the growth. There have been companies founded like Flutterwave, another payment company that's similar to Paystack, Andela. They raised from Mark Zuckerberg and a bunch of other prominent people. There are companies like Carrywise, PiggyVest. A lot of these companies tend to be within the financial services space. And if you remember what I discussed earlier, was this idea that the financial services infrastructure for Africa is being built. The same way how we leapfrogged kind of like landlines and um, moved into smartphones. And most people never had laptops, and just their first kind of interaction with the internet was on their mobile phone. It's never mobile first, it's like mobile only. We're building kind of like this financial infrastructure, and a lot of companies are being set up, whether it's in savings and investments, whether it's in credit, whether it's in payments or e-commerce, logistics. It's a really, really diverse ecosystem. And yeah, it's growing rapidly. When I founded Microtraction 3 years ago, or 3.5 years ago, it was, I'm not even sure I thought the ecosystem will have scaled as quickly as it has. So it's pretty it's exciting to be a part of it. And I can't wait for what the next 5 years will look like when $200 million exits are kind of like the norm, and people realize that, oh shit, stuff is happening, on the
Yeah.
continent.
Yeah. I think it's going to be, as you note here, it's like when you first saw that, that product, that, in 2015, oh, $1 million from a, indigenous VC, indigenous founder. And then it's like, okay, now more folks are starting to pay more and more attention. Like, okay, $200 million, that's a lot. And then, in 5 years, is it's a normal thing, or when in the future, it's like, oh my God, it's kind of like with, it's similar from my own like personal Western perspective, American perspective. It's like, blah blah blah, living my life, and then like all of a sudden, oh my God, China has so many people and so much tech, and they have these massive exits or whatever. And I think it's
Hmm.
a similar vibe with Africa soon. Does it feel just kind of like societally or philosophically, is there this sense? I'm reminded of, I lived in China for a year, and this sense in China of like, after, with Deng Xiaoping in the 80s, and then this like movement towards more and more, marketization and opening up, and this sense of, bringing hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, and like everybody felt there's this sense, this like palpable sense of excitement and like hardworkingness of like, okay, we're like moving up in the world. Is there, tell me, like, what is that feeling for Nigeria or for Africa? Like, does that exist? This feeling like, hey, we're gonna like do something as a country, and as a continent, or yeah, what does that feel like, societally?
I think it is extremely bullish, but at the same time also disheartening. And what I mean by that is that when you're in the US, or even in Europe, or even China, as the economy began to boom, the entire environment was set up to help you succeed, right? You know, whether it's the fact that you have like VC infrastructure, good universities, um, power, right? Financial services that work and are supporting entrepreneurs, um, good government policy and relaxed taxation. You have all these things that you don't even think about, that and allows you to focus on building your company. In Nigeria and most African countries, I genuinely believe that every single kind of like founder or like individual that does something has to be 5 to 10 times better, right? Like, because the whole infrastructure and the system is set up for you to fail. But what that does is that it creates extremely resilient and grateful individuals that, in my opinion, these same people can survive and build billion-dollar companies anywhere, right? Shola exited his company for $200 million. That same entrepreneur, if he was in the US, he could build a multi-billion-dollar company, because for him to get to where he got to, he had to sort of like, walk through the fire to get to where it is. So in my mind, like, I think it makes me so bullish because I know that like there's so many of us that are trying, and we're trying to create this change. And I was telling a friend the other day, I said in the US you have like the American dream, and the American dream is individualistic. You know, it's like, as an individual, I can come to the US and be successful regardless of my background. I don't think we have the Nigerian dream. Um, for me, I think what this week has shown me is that we have we should create a Nigerian vision, which is more or less a collective idea of what Nigeria can be, and why we as young people must fight for that future, to create the future that we want to live in, so that our kids can truly be proud to call themselves Nigerians or like Africans because of what we achieved in our own lifetime. And it wouldn't come from government, right? It won't come from the same people that are in government right now. It will come from us. It's on us to create the future we wanna live in.
Yeah.
So that's why I said like it's like you're bullish, but at the same time you're like, man, imagine if we had the kind of enabling infrastructure and environment that the rest of the world had. How where would we
Yeah.
be? So yeah, it's bittersweet.
Yeah, I love. I think that paradoxical perspective makes sense, and I just love that you're highlighting the kind of walk through the fire thing. It reminds me of, just for me again, as just I, as a person, growing up as just like a rich white, cis straight male in, Colorado, I had all of the privileges, given to me. And then over time, I've seen like, oh, wow, what is this like for different folks? And I remember just like, this is a simple example, but just like reading about, Hillary Clinton's life when she was going through Harvard Law School in the 70s, and being like, oh my God, like that sounds tough. Like people were so mean to her and they didn't think that a woman should be there and all these things. And similarly, it's like just that like underlying sense of infrastructure where it's like, hey, yeah, all these folks, what you're doing in Africa, what other folks are doing in Africa and Nigeria, it's just like the amount of, yeah, you'll have to work, yeah, 5 to 10x harder to get the same stuff done. And so hopefully I hope it can happen, and I'm excited for a reality, and it's thank you for building the infrastructure that will help more and more people get more stuff done, because I think that that's going to be an exciting reality. So as we kind of wrap up here, I guess I want to ask a couple things, mainly like, is there anything, for listeners who are listening to this, is there any way that they can learn more about SARS, or any way that they can like help with the hashtag in SARS movement?
Yeah, I mean, like I think for me, I actually created a Twitter list for um a few key accounts that one can follow to kind of like just keep track of what's going on. It's the news and the updates is so uh crazy right now. So Twitter is still the best place to kind of be up to date. If you want to support, I recommend the Feminist Coalition. I can share the links with you
Hmm.
later on. But they're a group of exceptional women who have donated to who have been able to raise funds from various individuals and companies, um, and are providing kind of like aid from food, water, masks, ambulances, security for the protests, and just ensuring things work as smoothly as possible, and also providing like legal aid to get protesters that have been arrested unjustly out of prison. And when you check their website, you can track where and how your money has been spent. And yeah, it is just the best, in my opinion, it's the best way to get started. And they also share regular updates all the time. So yeah, I think the Twitter list, you can follow that, and then Feminist Coalition as well. They have a Bitcoin wallet that you can donate funds to. And yeah,
That
that's it
sounds
really.
good. Yeah, I'll share those with listeners as links as well. And I guess just for folks to learn more about you or Microtraction or Bundle Africa, is where can they find you on Twitter?
Okay, so on Twitter, my email, sorry, Twitter, my handle is at Yele Bademosi. Um, yeah, and then for Bundle Africa, it's at Bundle Africa, one word, and Microtraction is at Microtraction, one word. Yeah, that's kind of like the best place to keep up to date.
Great. Yeah, that sounds good. I'll link to those as well. And again, Yele, thank you for just sharing your story, that intense story with SARS earlier for us today, and with the world, and as part of, as you noted, as a part of this collective, Me Too style thing of, hey, this is an issue and everybody's had something with it. Thank you for getting out there on the streets and for protesting, and really hoping for the best for Nigeria, both in this next coming period with SARS, and also generally just excited for a version of infrastructure in the future that you and others are building that will allow people to do amazing things in Africa over the coming century. So thanks again for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, man. It's been a real pleasure, and look forward to listening to the episode when it's
Yeah,
out.
nice. Okay, great. Thanks, Yele, and thanks, listeners. Goodbye, everybody. Couple quick notes at the end. Hope you enjoyed that episode. First, a bit on tech and network nonviolent protest. This is definitely one of my passions, and I think that the best book to read here is, as I noted in the show, Zeynep Tufekci's Twitter and Tear Gas. It really shows how these movements, how nonviolent protest in general is a combination of signaling from the movement to the state, something like, oh, here's a really big protest, like y'all better listen to us. There's the signaling side, which is generally done with information, and there's also the capacity building side, where you're starting to build out hierarchies and networks of communication and ways to kind of, capital and getting funding and things that can kind of sustain the movement. So there's like the one-shot things, which are the signals, and then there's the longer-term capacity building. And as Zeynep talks about in her book, the one-shot signals were really hyper... They became a lot more powerful with Twitter and with Facebook and all these things, and especially in, Zeynep uses the Arab Spring as her example here, and you can see, wow, it's amazing, the ability to get these people together with these strong signals, let's take down the state, but then the fragility, in the subtitle of her book is called The Power and Fragility of Networked Nonviolent Protest. The fragility piece is that, yeah, those signals were powerful at the beginning, but were not updated long-term they didn't have the capacity building behind them. And so for many things in the Arab Spring, there was the big signal, the state was taken down, and then the long-term capacity building of the movement didn't exist. So this is similar in Nigeria right now, but obviously very different. The cool similar thing is that it is, just for Yele, hearing about how different it was with the 2012 Occupy protests versus in Africa and in Nigeria versus the protests now, and how these days everybody has smartphones and data and they're influencers, and that has such a massive impact on the evolution of these protests. And I really like Yele's response here, which is that even if the protest fails, that some of the communications networks and other kinds of networks that were built up here will continue to stay and be sticky over time. Just like how in the Arab Spring, folks now know that they can protest and things of that variety. I also think the other piece here, just as a reminder for everybody with tech and network nonviolent protest, there's like the movement building piece, which is getting everybody out in the streets. And there's also just the match that lights the fire for all this. And the match is just the ability for smartphones to film bad things, or, what Ben Thompson calls the dust in the air, or what, Ben Thompson, quoting Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, calls dust in the air, which is like, yeah, there are bad things happening all around us, and once we can smartphone film them, then we can say, oh my God, that's so bad, let's protest against it. The other thing, as I'm just vocal processing through this, is that, just seeing the power of one thing that the internet does, just like filming bad things happening and then everybody getting angry about them, is it allows people with shared stories to come out. It allows these inner, something that wasn't common knowledge to come out. And, here it's Yele's story and many other people's stories of, oh my God, SARS is bad. And we can do this kind of slacktivism, where Yele, slacktivism is the negative connotation term of it, but it's kind of easier for everybody to get online and say #MeToo. It's easier for everybody to get online and say, hey, I've been messed up by SARS as well, so let's chat about that. Yeah, so that's on the tech and network nonviolent protest side. Also, just generally thinking about the evolution of democracies and authoritarian regimes around the world. Nigeria is new to democracy. I mean, they just got independence from colonialization in 1960. They really started their stable democracy in 1999 after a couple years of back and forth and some civil wars. And the 2015 presidential election was the first time that an incumbent president had lost re-election. That's big stuff. And I think it's just exciting to see where they're going to go. And I'm reminded of, Robert Englehart's book around cultural evolution and how self-expression values create democracy. And in a place like Nigeria right now, which has relatively low democracy, I think it's 4 out of 10 on the democracy index. They're a quote-unquote hybrid regime. They're high-ish on self-expression values. They're like 0.5 out of 2 for that, and which is relatively high. It's 0.5 out of 2, but -2 is kind of survival values versus self-expression values. And so they're 0.5. They're on the self-expression value side. And what happens in the past, and what happened in like the USSR, when the USSR collapsed in the late 80s, early 90s, there was a bunch of desire from the kind of satellite states. They had a lot of self-expression values, aka a desire, a demand for democracy, so that when the USSR fell, democracy showed up in its place. And I think we are seeing a similar thing as we get more self-expression values in the world. Those then turn into democracy. Great. And then the third piece I want to say here is around privilege. And just really powerful story from Yele about how it's exciting to be building out infrastructure for Africa, and it's also so hard. I mean, from the smallest things, from things like being, extorted money by, in theory, your government, to, having 5 to 10x, to it being not having the power, power in the literal energy sense, like electricity to build stuff out. So I think that it's just a reminder for me of not only just being scoped to the United States, but a reminder of being scoped to the world as a whole, and how privilege is a function of both your identity, but also where you're born and what governments you have and all of these things. And that, I'm excited for more and more infrastructure to be built for Africa and Nigeria, so that, people can be in a place that I was at when I was born as a child, which is, connected into college and education and universities, and this belief that I could be something, and, being told in the office space that I was, a contributing member and having electricity every day. So hoping for that for more people. Yeah, and excited that Yele and other folks are building it. Okay, that is today's episode. Hope you enjoyed it. Goodbye.